And I also want to address the fact that, a lot of times I believe the reason that you ladies are struggling in your marriage is because you struggle personally. That is not to excuse bad behavior on your husband's part. That's not to excuse wounds that he has inflicted on you, if God forbid he has done that physically, mentally, emotionally. But you have your own struggles. You have your own history that's brought you to this point. If you had an upbringing that was less than ideal, if you did not feel like you were as loved as you could have or should have been, that is going to carry into your marriage.
Welcome to Authentic Conversations. I'm your host, Ryan James Miller, and I believe the way to freedom, fulfillment, and success ultimately comes by living as the most authentic version of yourself. If you're ready to live the life you've dreamed of, you're in the right place.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am Ryan James Miller, your host. So we are 2 episodes away from concluding season 2 of this podcast. This season has been specifically focused on talking to men about manhood and masculinity. And I've had some great conversations, probably a little bit biased, but had some great conversations just digging into those 2 words, their descriptions, their outworkings, and just having those discussions with so many other men. It's been great. I've gotten a lot of wonderful feedback. So today I'm going to address the ladies more specifically. And then on the final episode of this season, I'm actually going to bring my wife, Michelle, on, and we are going to talk about our marriage. She doesn't even know some of this yet, but I'm going to ask her some questions as it relates to things that she saw as gaping holes in the past, errors of my ways, struggles, and then how she kind of observed me overcoming those, how she set expectations for me in our marriage, and just kind of dialogue around some of that stuff all the way up until present day. So hopefully that's going to be helpful for you. But today I want to talk more specifically to the women that have endured this last season of me talking specifically to men. And so I want to start off by saying, the reason that I challenge men so often is because I am one, obviously. Maybe that's not so obvious in society today, but obviously I am one. And on top of that, as many of you know, my journey has been quite a challenging one as a man growing up with just so many struggles early in my life, and then that seeping into my marriage, and then my marriage with Michelle having so many struggles early on, and how God has really blessed us in just rebuilding that. And so I have a heart to help other men by sharing my own story, wisdom, experience with them. On top of that, I believe that men are a center point for society, not the center point, but a center point for society. When men fall, when men fail, society seems to follow along with them. When men abdicate responsibility, when men turn a blind eye to the things that are going on in this world. And so I just see that happening so often. That's why I talk to men. But I understand that alongside every man in a marriage is a woman that deeply desires to see her husband be the best that he can possibly be. And so I want to talk a little bit about that today. This is going to be a very brief episode because I'm actually just kind of teeing up what Michelle and I are going to talk about next week. But for now, I just wanted to share just a few things for you women that aren't getting everything out of your marriage that you hope you would, or that you desire it to be. Now, I'm going to qualify this right up front and say that I don't know everything. I haven't experienced everything. And on top of all that, I am not a woman. So I don't have personal experience into the things that you ladies deal with, but I do want to use this as an opportunity more to encourage you as you maybe you are deeply struggling in your marriage. Maybe you just feel like there's just 1, 2, 3% that your husband could grow, and it could be absolutely amazing. So that's what I want to talk about today. And I also want to address the fact that, a lot of times I believe the reason that you ladies are struggling in your marriage is because you struggle personally. That is not to excuse bad behavior on your husband's part. That's not to excuse wounds that he has inflicted on you, if God forbid he has done that physically, mentally, emotionally. But you have your own struggles. You have your own history that's brought you to this point. If you had an upbringing that was less than ideal, if you did not feel like you were as loved as you could have or should have been, that is going to carry into your marriage. If you had destructive friendships or less than ideal friendships, that is going to carry into your marriage. If you had bad past relationships, whether you were abused, and that could be physical, mental, emotional, verbal, whether you were abused, mistreated, even if you simply, and I know this is going to trigger a lot of you ladies, but if you have had sex with another man, if you've had sex with another man prior to having sex with your husband, you carry baggage into your relationship. I wish I had not done that, but even for my wife and I, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit next week, but having partners previous to each other definitely creates challenges, distortions, expectations. You want to think that you're always better than the person previous to you, and hopefully you are, but that's not always the case. Maybe that there was just some ugliness in those past sexual relationships. So anyway, you're carrying a lot of baggage into that, and that probably has caused you to question your self-worth, your self-esteem, your value. And so there is just a lot that you are carrying into your marriage that sets that marriage up for struggle, or definitely more difficulty than had you not dealt with some of those things. And I don't know anybody that hasn't dealt with some of that. So each one of you is carrying some baggage into your relationship, more than likely. And then you're imposing some of those expectations, desires, past hurts, you're imposing those things onto your current husband, which is understandable, but it's not fair. And so there is just so many things that come into play here. On top of that, you don't know how men think. You don't know how men communicate. You don't necessarily know what men want. And you don't know what men struggle with, because, surprise, surprise, you aren't one. And so that puts you potentially behind the 8 ball. You are at a disadvantage, just like men are at a disadvantage because they don't necessarily know those things about you either. Even if you've had past experiences with other men, there are just gaps in your knowledge and understanding. Worse than that, maybe, worse than you not knowing what they think, how they communicate, what they want, and what they struggle with, is many of your husbands don't know those things either about themselves. They have not been taught. They have not been conditioned. They have not been invested into in such a way that they really understand how they think. They think they do, but they don't. There's a lot that they don't understand about themselves, about relationships. And if they had an absent father, or if they had distorted friendships or no friendships, those things all lead them to not really know how to think about the things they think about. Also, men don't always know how to communicate well. By nature, a lot of men communicate out of aggression, especially when there's been past hurt, struggle, when you are threatening his manhood. And though I say that lightly, that's the reality. And so oftentimes they have not been taught how to communicate. And so they need to learn that. They need to understand how best to communicate their thoughts, their feelings, their ideas, their needs, their desires, all of those things. Oftentimes, men don't actually know what they want. Even when I got married, I knew I wanted a spouse. Once I met Michelle, I knew that I wanted Michelle to be my wife almost immediately. That's not an exaggeration. We had been best friends for many years before. And yet, what I thought I wanted versus what I really wanted, and maybe even more importantly, what I actually needed, were such different things. And so because I thought I wanted certain things, I imposed expectations on her that she was incapable of meeting. And that was my fault. My fault because I didn't know. My fault because I didn't communicate them ahead of time. So that goes back to communication. So there are just so many things that are wrapped up in men not knowing what they want. And then finally, as much as I say that you need to know what men struggle with, they need to know what they struggle with. We often as men have been conditioned just to callous over, run away from, bury our past hurts, our past struggles. And if we are burying those things or callousing over them, those things will just continue to fester inside of us. And you need to understand that while it's frustrating, them not knowing what they struggle with or how to deal with what they struggle with means they are going to have a hard time being in a good, healthy relationship with you. And then think about this. When I talk about, needing to know, and this goes both ways, but when I talk about needing to know for you ladies, how men think, how men communicate, what they want and what they struggle with, those are big challenges in and of themselves. And then think about how those things overlay with our discussions, our needs, our desires around finances, around sex, around work and performance, around friendship, around kids. So it just creates just this ball of mess. And so all that to say, and in keeping today's episode fairly short, here's what I want to encourage you to today. First thing is, if you want your relationships to be the best they possibly can be, if you want your relationships to be the best they possibly can be, you need to both work on yourselves individually. You are no longer individuals in the sense that the two become one, but you still need to work on your individual struggles, your individual past, your individual hurts. So that way you're not bringing those things into the relationship in a negative way, or you're working on them in a positive way with your spouse. So you need to understand that. Secondly, is you do need to have empathy for, and I'm not saying you don't, but you need to have empathy for the lack that your partner is experiencing, what they don't know, what they don't understand, what they haven't yet dealt with. Again, this is not an excuse, but we need to understand the reality of the situations that we're in. We need to understand the reality of the relationships that we're in. So my message, as best as I possibly can today, is definitely get to know yourself, but also extend grace over and over again. And I know some of you are exhausted. You're tired of extending grace. But if you continue to work on yourself, you continue to encourage your spouse to do the same thing. Go find somebody to talk to work with, a coach. I would prefer a coach over a therapist, but if you need to go to a therapist, you can go there. So encourage them to grow. And then just openly communicate the things you don't know, the things you need, the things you want, but do that in a constructive manner, not out of a reaction of anger when you're frustrated with situations. All that to say, I want to encourage you ladies, keep fighting the fight. Unfortunately, a lot of times, if you're in a bad way, your husbands are not going to do anything about it until the absolute crap hits the fan, until it is so bad and so far gone that they then realize what they're about to lose. So continue to fight, continue to encourage them to do the same thing, not with each other, but fight for what you guys want. Reach out to other people, understand, communicate. And then wait for next week. I'm excited to have you hear from Michelle's perspective a lot of the things that we've dealt with, and I believe a lot of things that are going to be helpful for you, and probably things that you can relate to in past experiences we've had and struggled with, but also a lot of the ways that we're proactively working together today to make our marriage, the best that it possibly can be. Thanks so much for listening, you guys. Have an amazing day. Have an amazing week. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Authentic Conversations. If you are ready to live the life you've dreamed of, I'm here to help. Head to ryanjamesmiller.com/podcast to begin your journey. And if this episode impacted you in any way, pay it forward by sharing it with someone you know. I'm Ryan James Miller, and I'll see you next time on Authentic Conversations.